Hey all, I hope everyone's managing okay with the quarantine as best everyone can. I hope everyone's staying safe. So with today's video, what we're going to be going over is I'll have a bit of a chat about something we call spinal stability, what that actually means in terms of practically, as well as going over 3 different exercises that we generally refer to as the McGill Big 3, which are developed by researcher Stuart McGill, which are really good ways of us addressing any sort of issues with spinal stability or just kind of generally helping us to improve it. So spinal stability is a bit of an interesting concept. So as you might be able to see on Sam back here, a little blurry, but you might be able to make it out, the spine's not a structure that looks particularly stable. You've basically got lots of vertebrae, lots of bones stacked on top of each other, with kind of the soft, squishy intervertebral discs in the middle. Now, it's not really a structure that's designed to be stable. However, it is able to provide quite a strong, stable platform when it's needed. So if we look at an example of what this sort of stability is in a different area of the body, so if I have my hand up, if I'm wiggling this finger, in order for me to move independently at that finger, the wrist needs to be stabilized and the elbow needs to be stabilized. If not, then kind of everything goes. The spine, when we're talking about spinal stability, we're talking about something a bit more like that. So if you're walking around, we can't have your back flopping all over the place. It needs to be able to form a strong, stable column. There's a lot of muscles around the lower back and around the spine that do allow your body to be able to do this. So some of these are much bigger muscles, some are very small ones that sit between the vertebrae, and everything kind of has to work in conjunction to be able to turn this kind of wiggly, bony, snaky thing into a really stable column that allows us to transfer force from area to area in our body if we're doing something like walking or lifting, without losing too much of it. So if the spine's not stable, we lose quite a lot of force with our movements, but it also means that the spine's more prone to injury. So the exercises that we'll be going over are really good for both rehab, if you are having back problems, but also really good for injury prevention. And to be honest, the injury prevention side of things is ideally what we're going for here. You don't have to rehab injuries if you don't really get them in the first place. Now, important for us to note before we do anything else, these exercises are not a cure-all. There are other more major issues that people can have around the back which can be causing problems, especially lack of mobility around either through the lower back itself or through the hips or the thoracic spine, the upper back. Any of those do kind of need to be addressed independently of these. These exercises are just focusing on improving that spinal stability around the lower back. However, they are really easy exercises. They're not too difficult, they don't use any equipment, they're very easy to do at home, they're pretty time efficient. What we're focusing on with all 3 of these exercises is more what we call isometric contractions. So when we're saying that, a muscle can work in 3 different ways. If a muscle shortens, say my bicep there, that's what we call a concentric movement. If it controls how quickly something lengthens out, that's what we call an eccentric movement. And if it stays in position and works but nothing moves, that's what we call an isometric movement. So all these are basically hold position exercises. So the 3 of them are the curl up, the side plank, and the bird dog. Now, when we're doing these exercises, which we'll go over in a second, it's important that they're done really well. There is quite a lot of subtlety to these exercises as well, especially the bird dog and the curl ups, that if you're not doing them properly, they're not nearly as effective. The side plank's fairly self-explanatory and kind of pretty intuitive. The other 2 are probably worth, if you're having a bit of a problem with them, have a chat to your physio or have a chat to your personal trainer. They're pretty common exercises, so they'll probably be able to help you with them. But it really does often benefit from just a little bit of hands-on with some of these as well. Okay, so the first of our exercises is what we call the curl up. So what we're doing, ideally get a mat or something, but you can just do this on the ground. I recommend a firmer ground rather than trying to do it on a bed. Lying on your back, hands behind your back. So from here, you want to straighten one leg out. Now what we don't want to do with this is we don't want to be doing a sit-up. Okay? We're not trying to move our lower back. So your hands are behind there. You've still got a little bit of an arch through the lower back. But what we're trying to do is keep that back exactly where it is and just lift our shoulders and head up off the ground or off the bed. We're holding this for about 8 seconds. and then relaxing down. What we're doing is we're repeating that a few times. And the way that we want the reps to work in this is probably a little bit different than how we'll do this in more traditional types of exercises. Because these exercises are focused primarily on endurance, we're going to have quite a different rep structure. So to start with your first set being 5 reps, then 20 to 30 second rest, then 3 reps, another 20 to 30 second rest, and then 1 rep, and then good. To progress that, you can increase the hold time a little bit. Okay, we're starting between 8 and 10 seconds, so you can push that up to say 15 to 20. But a better way to do that is to increase your reps. So maybe start with 8, then go down to 5, then to 3, then to 1. But you want to be sort of tapering down those reps as you go through the sets. So again, lying on your back, one knee bent up, one knee straight, hands behind your back. Lifting the chest, shoulders and neck off. Don't curl right up, just hold and relax down. Our next exercise is a side plank. So these are a little bit more straightforward than the other two. In theory, quite difficult to get wrong. We do have different stages for these. So planks are not easy. If you've grown up doing them, then you kind of get used to them and they're fine. But for most people, they're not a fun exercise. They are a very, very effective exercise though. So with a side plank, we'll be working on all the muscles through here, as well as actually our glutes quite a lot, which is a bit of a secondary effect of this exercise, but it's always one that helps. So our first stage with a side plank. So on your elbow, on this side, this bit isn't going to change throughout our different stages. Make sure that it's basically a straight line from your shoulder down. You don't want your arm out here or under here. Otherwise you're going to be using a lot of deltoid to keep yourself up and your shoulder's going to get really tired. Basically you want a straight line down, so we're just loading directly through the humerus. So our first stage, shoulders in line with your knees, nice straight line right down. Knees bent up, okay? You can have your top leg straight, doesn't matter too much, top leg straight is probably a little bit easier. And from here, lifting up. Okay? So our first stage, we keep our top leg on the ground, push off our knee at the bottom. This hand stays on your hip. Okay? Looks a bit silly, but it's quite important because it's going to stop you from rotating one way or the other. Okay? So that stays there, and then down. Our second stage is very similar, up, except this time we're going to lift that top leg off. Okay? This is a little bit more difficult. Our third stage, full side plank. So this time we've got both legs straight. Again, make sure we're a straight line down from our shoulder, down to our ankles. Okay? Don't want the legs back here or curled up. Okay? Nice and straight, keep the back nice and straight. Okay? Again, a little bit of an arch. You don't want it rounded. Flat as you can get it, but a natural curve for your back is a little bit of what we call lordosis, a little bit of an arch in it. Again, hand on the hip, lifting up, holding. Our final stage is quite a lot more difficult. This one's a big jump from this one. Well, our last stage is a big jump from our third stage. Very similar, so this time you're lifting, and then top leg comes off, and we hold. In terms of hold times with this, we're going to stay pretty similar to what we did with the curl-ups. Okay? So starting off with 8 to 10 seconds. You can work these up a little bit higher, so up to sort of 20 to 30 second holds if you need to. And we're going to keep the same rep structure. So starting off with 5, 3, 1 in our 3 sets. Okay? And then progressing as you need to, add another set in with more reps at the start, or increase those hold times. Right, so our last exercise is what we call a bird dog. Now this one is probably the most difficult exercise, but it's difficult in a bit of an odd way. When you start doing these, you're probably going to find them really easy. That's because you're not doing them right. I'll show you in a second, but what we really need to do is, this whole exercise is about keeping your weight very centered and very even, and then having your core and your back compensate for that, and not having your whole body compensate for that. So there's a couple of different variations of this. The one that looks a bit harder is probably actually an easier one to start off with, because you don't need quite as much control with it. And the one that looks a lot easier is a lot more technical and a bit trickier. It's not too bad, but it's definitely one of those exercises where it feels like you're not doing anything until you figure it out and it clicks, and then you feel like you're doing quite a lot. So what we'll do is I'll show you the traditional variation with one arm and one leg off first, which is a bit more straightforwards, and then we'll go on to the what looks much simpler but is probably a bit more difficult, probably a bit more effective version that you can sort of have a bit of a try at as well. So what we're doing with this, onto your hands and onto your knees. So same as we were with the side plank, make sure that your hands or your knees are directly underneath you here. So we don't want you out here, okay, or under here. We're working on the core, okay, and on the back. So we don't want to have to deal with your shoulders fatiguing as well. Okay, we want to try and minimize that. So your traditional bird dog, what you're doing, again, keep your back nice and flat, or very slight arch. We don't want it down through here. Okay, we don't want you rounded up like that. Okay, so try and keep things pretty flat. Is you're lifting one arm on one leg, slowly, trying to keep your weight nice and centered, holding for a few seconds, and then down. Okay, you can alternate sides on this, or do multiples on the same side, and then swap over later. Okay, fairly straightforward. To be honest, probably a little bit easier than it looks. By contrast, the better version of the bird dogs, in my opinion, is when we're moving one arm or one leg, but they're a lot trickier to get right. So, what we're doing with this, exactly the same, except this time, all I'm doing is moving one arm, and then down. Now that's quite a lot harder than that. With this, because I've got one arm and one leg out, my body kind of auto-balances my weight. Okay, so of course not having to work that hard. It's having to do a bit, but not nearly as much as if we're doing one of these properly. The reason I say this is a bit of a difficult exercise is what happens when people start doing these is you'll do that. That's really easy. So what I've done, I've shifted my weight away from my hand, because I know I'm going to move this one, and then I lift that. At this point, when I'm about to lift it, it's not really supporting anything. To do it properly, you need to be able to keep your weight even, so 25% of your weight through each hand, 25% through each leg, okay? And then that doesn't change when you lift. So what's got to happen is your core has to compensate for that removal of that, basically that 25% of your weight pillar. The second way is a much more effective version of this exercise, but like I said, it is a lot trickier. So it's definitely worth practicing, but it does take a bit of practice to get it right. The more traditional bird dog, the one arm, one leg, very good exercise, okay? And that is the one that Stuart McGill proposed in his research. So it is the proper one, I suppose. And that's mostly because the second one is quite tricky to do right, but if you can get them, it's a much more effective exercise and it's a much better use of your time. Again, we're going to keep a very similar rep structure with this, except probably a little bit higher reps. Okay? So maybe start with 8, then 5, then 3, then 1 as a baseline. Okay? You're holding them for a little bit less time. So probably 8 to 10 seconds all up, including stretching things out, and then back in. It's a little bit less taxing than something like the side plank, but they are very good exercises. So there we are, guys. McGill Big 3. Hopefully finding some of those helpful. Like I mentioned earlier, they are really good for injury prevention especially, so they're a good idea to be doing these nice and frequently, especially while we're all stuck inside in quarantine. A lot of time we don't have much else to do. You might as well do some of these exercises that you can do, again, without much equipment. Especially with, slightly more serious now for the quarantine, a lot of us are spending a lot more time sitting than we used to, which is not great for the back. So it is really important during these times. I think people underappreciate how much exercise they actually get, even if it's just walking around the office and things. We're not doing that at the moment. I know I'm feeling it. I'm used to standing up probably the majority of the day working with patients. My back's not been particularly happy with me sitting for as long as I am. So I've had to make sure that I'm sort of trying to keep on top of that. And again, I'd advise pretty much anyone to be doing the same thing. Thanks for watching, guys. Stay tuned. We'll hopefully continue these with some more interesting videos and some tips to keep you keep you nice and healthy during the quarantine period. Right? Thanks.